I'm Sherry Rattle. I'm the director of the Adult Program Series here at the JCC, and I'm delighted to see all of you. Thank you for joining us. And today I'm thrilled to bring back Sher Tinsley. She has spoken to us, well, let's see, it's been 3 years now that we've been interacting, or it's 3 times you've come to interact with us, isn't it?
I've lost count. I think it's 2, but it might be 3.
It is a wonderful relationship we've built. I'm thrilled to have her back, and she's going to tell you about her newest story. A book, right? The first book?
Yes.
Please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Because most of you know me so well, and I don't see any strangers. I know all of you very well, at least as well as one can know another person whom one is associated with in a writing class. Because you know me well, you'll appreciate this little story. It's the introduction to my reading. I just finished a second poetry book and finally discovered I had a poem in there I don't even remember putting in there, nor do I remember writing it. And the title of the poem is Tour Group to Italy, a Novel, a Sonnet. So I'm going to read it to you, and then perhaps I'll have enough courage to start. Musing on the poet's novel, Candida's own Italian Renaissance, as you know, that is the title of the book, a sensuous journey through time. All tourists found themselves in Italy. There they indulged in jealousy and love. Their dialogue I designed quite wittily and listened to it as if from up above. No writer could reveal 36 souls in all their tastes, professions, histories. A tour guide sees but some unpleasant shoals and can solve certain but not all mysteries. The art and treasures of the Renaissance will put some tourists in a state of bliss. Others will take this as a happy chance to inform strangers what's in them amiss. Who leads a tour group to Italian cities becomes the object of 1,000 pities. Who writes a novel about such a tour may later feel contented and secure. I do feel secure about Italy. I did make over 30 trips to Italy. I lived in Florence for 5 months with my little daughter, Claire, in the front row. She's no longer 4. And my husband in the beret. I lived in northern Italy for 2 months, I think, up near Innsbruck. So I know a lot, but not everything about Italy. I led this tour when I was in my late 30s and already had a family and a husband. I just want to tell you right now off the bat, I am not Candida, who is my heroine. Although, as my content editor, Lynn Rogers, sitting in red, will tell you, there are occasional similarities. We have some instincts in common. I thought, because no one can read a 471-page novel to a group, I would give you a flavor by beginning where I begin. Chapter 1, I get the boot being Italy. I, Candida Daraway, am looking forward to the autumn quarter, 1973, at Altamonte College with its clear view of the Bay Bridge to Oakland. It offers the only clarity I have some days. I am 32 and got tenure as associate prof at 30. I teach language arts, that is French and Italian. That's my bag, stodgy as it may seem. I earned a doctorate at Cal, where for decades academics had been defending civil rights. All I ever defended at Cal was my dissertation. It was entitled Boccaccio, Plague of Platitudes, my analysis of Boccaccio's rhetorical style. And I threw that in because my own dissertation advisor said I used a lot of cliches, and it just stuck in my mind that I was guilty of some of the platitudinous cliches that all writers use. Hello, Roger. Welcome. I won't go much beyond that, except the next scene is a conversation with a man, not a professional editor, a popular editor who has set the cover up as dancing skeletons. Boccaccio, 14th century, Black Death, much death. And he has put these skeletons in positions of, how shall we say, immorality and sexual connection. And I don't complain, because by the time I've gone through trying to get this published quickly, I just say the faster the better. The faster it's out, the more apt I am to get a better job, because my college is very peculiar. So I will start reading in a more determined way. In this first chapter, I get the boot. I'm invited to lead a tour to Italy, and the person who gives me the invitation comes through the auspices of the president, Roger Harvey. He's tall, handsome as hell, 6'4", wavy hair. He's a talented man with problems. One problem is that he seems to want to seduce Candida. The second problem is that he's very contentious and egotistical. And the third problem is that you can't count on him. Sometimes he's very kind. His name is Rob Farrell. And he knocks me up at my office just before I go off to teach and says, I think I'll sit down. I'll be happier and you'll see more of me. I've come to proposition you, he said, tossing his large head of hair as he did so, laughing. His auburn hair, thick and wavy, was shining gloriously around his head. Mine was brown and didn't shine. This was because I cut it myself. I'd read that a good cut brought out the shine. Anyway, I couldn't afford a good haircut. Farrell's remark about propositioning me amused him. My friend, Molly, who teaches English here and once dated Farrell, said he was sexist. And I find, as the book goes on, that Molly was quite right about that. He is sexist. He's a misogynist, in fact, but one who is determined to put notches on his belt, even though he may not like the lady in question. I suppose that was standard for many men, and I'm not saying that he was the only one by any means. On page 7, I compare him to Harlequin. Harlequin is a character in the Commedia dell'arte, which was a set, stock group of characters in the Renaissance. They always did what they were expected to do. There was the handsome lover, the stern father, the treacherous friend, the maid who knew everything and betrayed everything. I've compared Rob Farrell, my co-leader-to-be, as Harlequin, the figure who represents unreliable love and treachery in all these stock dramas of the Renaissance. In the beginning, when he comes to talk to me, I mention that I don't know the term Silicon Valley, and the only thing I know about chips, hello, welcome, is apricot chips, since my father used to take me to pick apricots when I was a child, and the valley still had fruit. But Farrell scolds me for not being up to date. Looking at Professor Farrell, I asked, silicon, isn't that an element in the Earth's crust? He chided me for my ignorance. Get with it, Candy. The term Silicon Valley is a metonym for interactive digital media. And of course he makes me feel very low because I didn't know that. I'm only just emerging from the cocoon of dissertation studies, and my dissertation was, after all, the Italian Renaissance. They didn't have chips. They didn't have modern communication arts. When he leaves, he gets up abruptly and he says to me, "Do you know any trip wholesalers, Candida?" Now, of course, actually he calls me Candy. We get online and make our own connections, our own travel plans. But in the 70s, you had a trip wholesaler or a travel agent who did it for you. So he says, "Do I know any?" And then he says, "I don't." So I told Roger, who's our president, Roger Harvey, "You had travel connections." "You didn't," I said sharply. "I don't." "Well, then get some," Farrell said, rising. "Get some, Candy, because I have 200 students to your what, 40? She didn't even have 40, probably 30. "I don't have time for the small stuff, but we'll be meeting regularly, so you can tell me what you found out by next week. Monday morning at 9, my office. Yours is so depressing." And that gives you a little idea of how this full professor is treating a young associate. He is 53 and she's 32. By the way, her father is 53. And every important man that she is interested in this book is 53. Go figure. I want to introduce you to Teresa. When Candida's parents, when Candida was 14, they divorced and stuck her in a boarding school. And so she made friends with a woman she met somewhere, doesn't matter where. Her name is Teresa. She's an Italian American. She's actually a Countessa. She's a member of Italy's royal dynasty. The last royal dynasty of Italy resigned or was removed in 1954. And she belongs to that family, and she has become either an older sister or an ersatz mother to Candida. I can't figure it out. Sometimes she's like a sister to Candida. She's the grandmother of Candida's lover, but they're about to break up because they don't really fit together well. Teresa, on her mother's side, is a Napi of the Roman Renaissance Nappies. On her father's, a member of the royal dynasty of Sardinia, Piedmont, and Savoy, a direct descendant of King Victor Emmanuel I. Her husband, her third cousin, and also a della Savoia, from the royal house of Savoy. Medieval Savoy went from Switzerland to the Mediterranean and included places like Genoa and Nice. It was huge. went down to Milan. Well, her husband dropped dead on a tennis court at the age of 30, heart attack, leaving Teresa 6 months pregnant with Tony's mom. Teresa never remarried. She is in her mid-60s and looks 45. After her husband's death, she lived with several men on a consecutive basis. Living in sin is not sinful, Teresa explained, because Jesus loves us all, and the important thing is just to confess your sins before dying, not necessarily to a priest. Extreme unction, she maintained, the last rites, was a later invention of the papacy, like purgatory. Teresa rejected hellfire and purgatory, quote, because the popes made those things up when they needed more control over parishioners. And it goes on to explain that while she farms garlic in Gilroy, she goes every year to visit her royal family in a large villa in Florence, and if we get that far, we'll meet them. She buys appropriate clothing for Candida before she leaves for Italy, because Candida buys everything from the Salvation Army. And sometimes that really works out well, but sometimes she's kind of raggedy and she doesn't match. And so she wants to match. She wants a husband, she wants a perfect family of children, and she wants a promotion to her alma mater, Cal. So that's Candida. She wants it all. And in the 70s, that was a common saying. Women were looking to have it all, and she does say that. So I'm on 17 and I have to move out. Chapter 2 is called Altamonte Tries It On. And this means that they are out looking for people to enlist in this tour, which is designed to make possible the building of an ice rink. Their new president is a former Olympic hockey champion, and he wants an ice rink. They've already built a first-class theater. They enlist actors from the city for plays. They make a lot of money that way, and they charge very high tuitions. All their students flunk their SATs. So they can major in hockey, ballet, fashion design, yachting, and anything else that crosses their mind. This is 4 years. I mean, we can't just turn these kids loose with no place to go but a community college, can we now? They all live in Hillsborough and Palo Alto and Los Gatos and Saratoga and so on. They live in good families, good areas. Page 21, Molly Finkel teaches English, and she is Candida's best friend. She's just across the hall. And so Candida goes to quiz Molly about Farrell. Molly, I've been asked by Roger Harvey to co-lead a tour to Italy with Rob Farrell. I've had one meeting with him. He gave nothing away. Kind of sexy, even if he is in his early 50s. I need to know more about him to protect myself should the occasion arise. From yourself or from him, Molly was now peeling a banana. She's Jewish, and she believes in fruit. Candida's Jewish on her mother's side, and kind of mixed up Catholic and Episcopalian ancestors on her father's side. She offered me half. I accepted. From him, I suppose. She says, from yourself or from him? And I say, from him, I suppose. I'm only after the $4,000 this co-leader thing pays. Not him. But I feel I should know who he is. I mean, married, divorced, gay, bi, and those Italian shoes. Is he kind, indifferent, capricious, ambitious, lecherous, cruel? Give me the skinny. They're very close friends, so she knows she can count on Molly. She peered at me over her diminishing banana, and her eyes blinked above the peel hanging around the hand. The peel reminded me of Jocko, the monkey in our third grade readers. Jocko took her time replying, flicking at the peel with her thumb and index finger. Well, he was married once a long time ago. He is divorced, and he's not gay. How do you know all that? Candida asked. How? Because we had an affair the year before you came here, one that lasted just over 5 months. Ha! I said, laughing. Long enough to make a baby. Yes, Molly tossed the banana peel into her wastebasket. And I do kind of like the symbolism here. She tosses the peel away. And long enough to make a baby go away, too. I had an abortion at 4 months. He refused to marry me. Oh my God, Molly, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. And Molly says, you mustn't tell a living soul. His best friend is my Uncle Izzy, the cantor in Beth El Nur Tamid, the biggest synagogue, the one with a dome in the city. Now for you who know the real name, I renamed the synagogue. So on page 22, Candida is still listening, ears up. And Molly says further, one thing is more important than all the rest. And that is, I ask breathlessly, he just soaks up all the attention, all the admiration, and all the drama in any group. He is big, and people are in awe of him. He's like a golem in Jewish literature, a monster like those they make in rubber and blow up on a big screen to frighten adolescent boys. This is obviously before they could do it digitally. Like one of those Indian snake charmers when the lid of the basket opens, Candida asks. No, Indian snake charmers only charm the snakes. Rob even charms the baskets. So there now you have some idea of the damage he could do. And on to page 28, I probably won't get you very far to Italy, but I'll try my best. She, Candida, is writing a book, another book. Boccaccio won't get her a job at Cal. A second book might publish or perish. And so she's talking about Mandragola, in English the mandrake, in which Machiavelli wrestled with the cultural norms of his day, which is what we're doing in this book. We're questioning the norms of our 1973 day. Machiavelli wrote about politics, defense, and governance. Feral, like old Niccolo, was similarly learned. Was he also Machiavellian? Because Candida is now deep into Machiavelli. First Boccaccio, then Machiavelli. She will go on to Cellini. She will do her best to write on famous Renaissance authors but this is the one, and it's a play. She's not up for Machiavelli's defense systems. You know, Machiavelli was Secretary of State to the Florentine Republic, and then he lost his job when the French conquered Florence. But Machiavelli took this town, San Gimignano, and designed the breastworks for it. And there are plaques around the walls. I haven't painted the walls. The walls are boring. I did the towers instead. And those towers were living quarters, but there is a wall that runs, of course, around most Italian hill towns for a very good reason. And so she is interested in a play by Machiavelli, but she will soon be meeting someone who is interested in Machiavelli's war plans and political expertise. So I've done that. And I'm still in chapter 2, but almost finished. I'm not going to read this because I'd never finish. The end of chapter 2 tells who enrolls. It gives you a list of 31 people, and those are the people who try it on, i.e., they pay $4,800, imagine, 1973, for a luxury trip, 3 weeks in Italy, and they're supposed to stay in 4, preferably 5-star hotels, not 2 or 3, and not pensiones either, where I used to stay in the 1970s. Occasionally, I'd treat myself to a decayed good hotel for as much as $25 a night. A couple of years ago, I took my family into one and said, I stayed here for $25 a night. Their minimum was $375. The girl in the uniform behind the desk looked at me as if I had just arrived from Mars. Chapter 3. Yes, and when I get there, chapter 3, should be around page 33. Should be close on, yes. Is the boot fits all. That's because people go on this tour, but I am already on a plane with the tour, and I'm flying to Heathrow Airport because we have 2 days in London where we will view museums, principally the Victoria and Albert, which has the second largest collection of Renaissance artifacts in the world. So it's quite appropriate we should go there. But of course, we do stop there. And while we're in the plane, I think of all the things that have been going on in the last couple of months since I've been asked to lead or co-lead this trip. And one of the things I think is, well, a linguistic little nothing. This is a throwaway. I am a language major. I'm mulling things over because my partner is a very devout 28-year-old Catholic, and she will have a terrible tragedy occur to her in Assisi. And I did Assisi, but I did it on the cheap. Where is Assisi? Oh dear, did I leave it out? I have a picture of it somewhere. No, I don't see the picture. I did only the upper church. Well, I'm not going to look for the picture now, but the lower church is 3 loggias full of rooms, and you can see it for miles. Anyway, here's just a linguistic throwaway. Consider the effort in traveling. Travel meant work, travail in French. The Italian word is viaggio, from the Latin for road, and the Italians still keep via for road when they speak calmly and don't capitalize it. A road is a via. When Italians want you to hit the road, it's capitalized with an exclamation point. Via! Get out of my way, scram. That's what you say when some man is following you and you don't want him to. The point is, the French saw travel as work, travail, but the Italians found it a smooth road, via. Candida teaches both languages, but she prefers, because she's descended from Voltaire and she had to learn French, and it's a Romance language. But she's a direct descendant of Voltaire, whose name in French is d'Arouet, and in the book it's spelled Darroway because it got anglicized in the many centuries since Voltaire died. So this is Candida Darroway, a direct descendant. And the other thing that amused me, of course I did it on purpose, Candide is a story of not only travel, but travel by a naive man. Candid actually means naive, open, credulous. That's one of its meanings. And so there are lots of funny little connections, and if you know your language, you'll find a lot more. I want to describe to you, because she's thinking of how they made the flags. You know, think of Italian trips, tours abroad. They always have guides who carry an umbrella or a flag. And this is the one made in Altamonte College in the fashion design department. Now, it used to be called clothing construction.
And nobody took a class.
And nobody enrolled. And, well, the person who was the dean of women had once taught home ec in Iowa, where she was from. And Candida told her, now Catherine, don't get me confused. Candida told the dean, you'll never get anyone to enroll. Let's call it fashion design. And they couldn't they couldn't accommodate enough girls who thought fashion design was a great major, and indeed a successful one. They went off from 4 years at Altamonte, a whacked out college, and got jobs with Gucci and Versace and you name it. They were successful girls. But part of their learning was how to sew. And this is the flag. On it was Florence's lion, the Marzocco. This is a real lion designed by the Italian Renaissance artist Donatello, perhaps better known for one of his Davids, which stands in the Bargello Museum. It's a very young David, a very youthful, lithe David. There are lots of Davids in this book. Sorry about that, David Savio. Our video expert is also a David, but he wasn't made by Donatello. This lion, the Marzocco, is on our flag. Florence has a boar's statue. That means a pig statue. We know a lot of boars, but think porcine, think pig, in the marketplace. Farrell put the porcellino, which is what Italians call this boar, opposite the Marzocco. Hello. Welcome. So you have a lion opposite a pig. Probably lions ate pigs in real life, but on our flag, all was peace. Altamonte spent $300 per flag, more chic than the umbrellas used by British tour guides. And they do use umbrellas. Well, it rains a lot in the UK. Reverence for art and respect for Italy, God's own culture garden, was what Altamonte's flag conveyed. Beneath its lily, and a lily, sort of Irish-shaped, is another symbol for Florence. Farrell wrote, Altamonte College on the peninsula, forgetful that he was going to an even bigger peninsula, Italy. The girls in fashion design hemmed the silk banners, the shop guys worked miracles with their collapsible rods. That's what real men do with their tools, work miracles. Sorry about that. Well, no, I'm not sorry about that. I was happy about that. After all, flying to Italy is boring, and you need something sexy to think about. The next section is probably one of the more debatable, but I'm going to read it anyway. Oh, no, first I have to introduce you to a very important character. He is a professor named W.L. Spotswood and teaches Renaissance history, not literature, in Madison, Wisconsin. His age, anyone care to guess? 53. And so he's Farrell's age and her dad's age. He was a noted professor of Renaissance history with a long string of publications. She's sitting there in her seat wondering about this guy. I wondered why he had not simply applied for a grant. This was a pricey trip. I doubt he made a ton of money at Wisconsin, even with a chair. I had read several of his articles and his book on Renaissance education. I looked him up, 14 books on warfare and politics in Italy during the early Renaissance. And of course, he would be writing about Florence, because that's, aside from an occasional trip to San Gimignano, as I explained, Machiavelli was the Secretary of State of the Republic of Florence. And here's the Ponte Vecchio. And much later in the book, W.L. Spotswood and Candida will meet and go jewelry shopping. But in an event that's rather far ahead. But she's curious about this guy. He's good looking too. And she's read about him and doing her own research. And she wonders why he didn't just get a grant. I mean, with 14 books and hundreds of articles, he could have gotten a grant and gone to Bellagio on Lake Como. Now, I've been to Bellagio on Lake Como, and I even toyed with the idea, because I used to be an historian, of getting a grant, leaving my family, and going to Bellagio, which is a very seductive place. I mean, it's a tropical paradise, seductive in the way that the foliage just blends in with the villas, and of course, the beautiful Lake Como. Heck, if it's good enough for George, I thought it would be good enough for me. Even if I were living with a group of professors for a month doing so-called research. But then I thought, what kind of research would they be doing? But it would have been proper for him, if maybe not for me. And then I say, maybe W.L. Spotswood needed a change of pace and atmosphere where he was not doing research, not even pretending to do research. And he could feel guilt-free with us, whereas, if he'd gone to Bellagio, he'd be competing with other professors for, the way professors compete, they're always one up on each other. The second section in this chapter is hard. I'm going to explain it, and if you don't get it, I'm really sorry, but there's something really strange about Candida. It doesn't affect most of her doings, because she keeps it entirely to herself. But she has a peculiar talent. She learns about her family and her family's history and a lot of other people who are related to her by dreaming. Yes, she goes to bed, doesn't take Ambien, then she dreams of the Renaissance, and what she dreams is right, and no one can question it. So now I'm going to try to summarize her dreams about the Schwartz family, whom you haven't met yet. Barry Schwartz lives in St. Francis Woods with his family. A young wife, it's his second wife. He has 2 boys who attend state colleges. They're not too smart, but they go to San Jose State and Chico. Okay, forgive him. He's making a lot of money. He recarpeted his synagogue. He's a good soul in many ways, but he's a banker with all the flaws that bankers have. And so Candida dreams about his current domestic situation. And here it is. He lives with his young, 25-year-old, beautiful actress, model, wife, Myrna. And she's just had, a year and a half ago, twins. They're nearly 2, but she's bored by taking care of twins. So they hire a nanny named Maria Sanchez. All this Candida dreamt about. Maria Sanchez was, well, one side of her family were Peruvian Indians, but it so happens that when the Ashkenazi Jews were expelled from Spain in 1492, part of them were Candida's relatives, and part of them were called Blankenschiffs, white ships in German. The name was given to them in Middle Europe by German speakers. It is a common Jewish name, Blankenship. I saw it in the newspaper the other day. But anyway, what happens is that one of these Blankenschiffs, Hosea in Hebrew, and all of them speak Ladino, which is medieval Hebrew mixed with Castilian. They're persona non grata, they're on ships, and they're heading for the Crimea and for Odessa and places like that. And Candida knows that Hosea, who soon converts to Catholicism and takes the name Jose Sanchez. Many Jews today have Spanish last names, you know that. So this wasn't unusual. What's unusual is that this new convert hooks up with Pizarro in Greece because he's a young man and an adventurer. He just happens to be a remote ancestor of Candida. So what? So he goes to Greece, gets on a ship, and it's the ship that Pizarro has rented out, I guess, and off they go to Peru. And Jose is a very good fighter, and Pizarro sends him on difficult missions, one of which is to Catholicize a Peruvian Indian colony. Jose Sanchez, now speaking only Castilian, by the way, he studied up, so he doesn't mix it up with Hebrew anymore, marries in the Catholic Church a Peruvian girl. Hundreds of years pass. Their descendant, Maria Sanchez, decides to migrate to Hollywood. I mean, this is the 20th century. So she winds up in Hollywood. She doesn't get a part in a movie or anything. She gets a bus ticket and goes to St. Francis Wood in San Francisco. And there, I don't know how, and Candida doesn't tell us, she meets up with Barry Schwartz, who needs a nanny to take care of his twins. Maria is about 23. She's very beautiful. He lodges her upstairs, and then he builds a staircase from the garden to the patio. He loves Myrna, who's only 25, but he visits Maria after a while. Now, there's a funny thing about Maria I should let you in on. She knows the same Ladino tunes with a few words that Myrna's mother knows. Why not? They're related. They're Blankenschiffs, but they don't know that. Only Candida knows it in her head. So if you can make head or tail of all this very, how shall I say, what is a good word for this kind of stuff?
Convoluted
semi-magical powers that only give Candida an edge on other people. I mean, she knows about the whole family. She knows about Bobby Blankenship, Myrna's mother, and she knows that Maria Sanchez is a dead ringer for Myrna's mother. And then there are jokes about if Myrna doesn't take care of those twins, they'll think Maria is her real mother. And the two ladies, the old one, Bobby, and Myrna, and Maria, sing the same songs in this patois of Spanish and Hebrew to put the twins to sleep. It's kind of weird. But this is a very weird book in some respects. It's very straightforward in a few respects, but I'm not going to tell you what those are. Farrell invited, and she's thinking of this while flying in the clouds. The last couple of weeks that she was at her college, Farrell says, we're going to figure out our itinerary. They've already met 3 times on campus. And to do a really good itinerary, you've got to come up to my apartment in Coit, just behind Coit Tower in the city. Pack a night bag. We'll spend the whole afternoon. I'll give you a key to your own room. Believe me, you can lock yourself in. It's safe as can be. We're only colleagues. In the morning, we'll go to Louis' Delicatessen, which is very close to the Cliff House, overlooking the sea. Believe me, there is a Louis' Delicatessen pancake house near the Cliff House. That really exists. I couldn't help throwing it in. And Candida says, she's a little leery of this. Let's see. I did not sleep with Rob Farrell last autumn. He treated Molly badly in the first place. And an affair with someone who collects precious objects like Molly and then disposes of them doesn't seem promising. So what she does, in short, is arrive at 8 o'clock in the morning, bearing cafe lattes, knocks on his door. He's still in his pajamas. He's rather irritated. He says, where is your suitcase, Candida? And she said, oh, I didn't bring it. I sleep better in my own bed. We'll be finished. I'll take you out to lunch. And she does, at Girardelli Square. And by 4 o'clock, she's off in her own car, heading for her home in Alviso, which on last night's news was underwater, or expecting to be so shortly. But when Candida was living there, it wasn't, I think, a flood year. Anyway, she's living in Alviso because she can't afford to live up near the San Francisco College. She can't afford the rent. Some things never change, right? She can barely afford the gas. That was the year that they upped the price of gas and there were long gas lines. Well, they land. And chapter 4 is, I arrive in Italy alone. But first she arrives in Heathrow, and first she gets a chance to see, sorry, maybe I did mix something up here. No, they land in Heathrow, and, I arrive in Italy alone is partly about their experience in London. Sometimes even I get mixed up at my titles. They do arrive, they get a 4-star hotel. It's very, very nice, although the color combination is kind of tacky, but it was typical. Aqua, orange, tan, but it's close to Big Ben, and it's in a very good section of London. It's near the Parliament buildings. She can hear Big Ben ring. She mentions Virginia Woolf's description of Big Ben. And what else happens? They go off to visit the Victoria and Albert Museum on page 54. And she finds Professor Spotswood smiling down at her just when she's looking at a portrait of Alessandro de' Medici, who wasn't very nice. And he says, I'd be happy to fill you in on Alessandro. I've written all about that era, you know, and lots about Alessandro. I didn't know, though I didn't say so. I stared at him wide-eyed. And she says, I've only read one of your books, Professor Spotswood. And he says, much obliged. He's very easygoing, a little shorter than, and a little thinner than Rob Farrell, but has the same status. He has even a more status. He doesn't teach at a wacky four-year college. He teaches at the University of Wisconsin. And so they start to talk to each other, and he describes the painting, and she describes portions of her own history, or at least she thinks about them. She has made another trip to Italy, and she begins to think of the 70,000 Jews who occupied Italy before the war, World War II started, and how on her year of research, she tried to locate relatives in Lucca, which was part of Tuscany, and couldn't do it. She could trace them up to 1939, and then she couldn't find any more references of them. And she confides this to Mr. Spotswood. W.L. is all we know him by. We'll know his name later. And they troop off with a group to see the next feature in the Albert Museum, and it is a group of Raphael cartoons. Well, cartoons were designs for paintings. They were good designs, and these cartoons are very anti-Semitic for the most part, and Raphael designed them to hang in the papal apartments at the Vatican. And there's one in which a character called Bar, which means prevent, Jesus, is trying to persuade his fellow Jews not to convert. And Candida says, Paul, once a Jew named Saul, called on the Lord's power to blind Bar Jesus, a Jew, with a sacred mist so that he couldn't see his way to conversion. And she thinks of mace and student protests at Cal. Sacred mist, which is what Farrell is talking about, sounds nicer than something like mace or pepper spray. I think they used that in the 70s too. But she feels very depressed after seeing this cartoon because she knows that cartoons could be cruel enough to kill, at least indirectly. I have to let you in on a secret. I have never liked cartoons. I don't like the ones that are drawn except by a friend or two. I don't like the ones in the New Yorker. I just don't like cartoons. And I didn't like Raphael's cartoon at all. And seeing my reaction, W.L. takes my arm, and neither of us mention the harsh reality of Raphael's anti-Semitism or the papacy, which was, after all, the root cause and also the occasion of the decoration of the papal apartments. Well, okay. They see a lot of other things in this museum, and no one is up for the Tower of London because this is a huge museum. It's very exhausting. So when Rob says, how many of you would like to leave and now go and tour the Tower of London? Nobody wants to. And so they go back to the hotel where tea is being set up on low tables in the lobby for them. But Candida is not looking forward to tea so much as she is looking forward to George Bernard's play, because after dinner tonight they're going to see a Bernard Shaw play entitled Mrs. Warren's Profession. How many of you know what Mrs. Warren's profession was? She was a madam, right? She was a madam. She ran a whorehouse, high class. To myself, I thought, damn, what a drag. Because just as they enter the hotel, Farrell says, we've got a message from Charles Clark, and you are leaving the hotel immediately for Rome, all alone. And that's why this particular chapter is called, what is it called? I Arrive in Italy Alone. She's sent on ahead. She hardly has time to pack. In fact, her cosmetics are flowing out of her pockets, and her clothes are, jammed into her suitcase. And she has instructions. Get a hold of Charles Clark. Get a taxi. You'll arrive after midnight. Go out to this place Charles Clark has put us in, and if it's not a 4 or 5 star with a good view in a central location, why, threaten to sue him. We'll have his head on a plate. And she thinks to herself, I knew what Mrs. Warren did for a living, though, and I was beginning to fear that we might have worked in related trades. What was the difference, after all, between a man ordering you to Italy or into his bed and expecting you to perform? It wasn't money that made a woman a whore. It was obedience to the male will. So she's running down the steps. Anita Marble, who is of Italian extraction, Marmo was the Italian name, it still means marble, comes running up to her with a little bag in which she has stuffed sandwiches and a napkin, and W.L. Spotswood runs down on the other side and slips $200 bills into her pocket and gives her some advice. And his advice is, Candida, do not enter any taxi cab at Fiumicino or Leonardo da Vinci. It has the same 2 names in Italy. That's the airport in Rome. Well, it's outside of Rome, but it's Rome's airport. Not clearly identified as a public cab. Copy down any license number beforehand. Get the name and service number of the driver. Find out before entering the cab how much to the trip to the hotel costs. So he's very avuncular, this Professor Spotswood. And then he gives her the $200 bills. And so she gets there, and it's after 1 by the time she finds a cab. And she gets into a cab driven by Aldo della Grazia, a young man whose name means gracious, pleasant. It's related to our word for, and the Italian word for thank you. It's a positive name, della Grazia. Graceful, polite, pleasant, you name it. And he is very polite. He's also a terrible flirt. And he says, are you familiar with Rome at night? And she makes the mistake of answering in Italian, so then she has to play on his ground. And she says, I'm familiar with Rome, but not at night, because she doesn't want to give him the wrong idea. And he said, well, if you're not familiar with it at night, I can show it to you at no extra cost. So he's going to take her on this trip up and down the hills. You may think there are 7, but each hill in Rome has spurs. There are more like 14. And they each have a name, and he goes up one and up down the other, and then suddenly she remembers that you can't get to the highway by going up and down the 14 hills of Rome. And she orders him to hit the highway. And he does, taking us to Rome at last. I don't think I'm going to get you too very far through Italy, so I will point out the two Roman pictures I painted. This one is the Arch of Titus, which stands at the very head of the Roman Forum. And it has, and I explain in a later chapter about Titus. I'll do it now because I don't know if I'll get there. Titus fell in love with a Jewish princess during the 70 AD war that the Romans were making against the Jews in Judea. And he loved her passionately. But his father was Vespasian, and Vespasian was an old country-bred rough soldier. And he said, "You can't bring this Jewish babe home to Rome as your wife and the Empress of Rome," because when I die, that's what she would have been, because of Cleopatra. Everybody hated what Cleopatra stood for. She was trying to carve off a portion of the Roman Empire, namely Egypt, where they grew all the grain, and she hoodwinked Caesar, and she hoodwinked Mark Antony, and God knows who else she hoodwinked and went to bed with. And so a marriage between Titus, and this is his arch, erected by his brother Domitian, who was poisoned because Domitian was a lot worse than Titus. Anyway, there it is. Go to the Roman Forum, look to the left, and you'll see it. My only other painting of Rome is the Tivoli Gardens, where the group will go on their next to last day to get some fresh air. It is very hot in summer in Rome. And here you see a palace built by the popes, mining the stones of Hadrian's villa, which was built in the 2nd century, early in the 2nd century, and is on the other side of the town. Hadrian wanted to build replicas of all his favorite buildings in his empire, which stretched from France, I think, or Belgium, yes, to Assyria, to Egypt, and encompass most of the inhabitable world. In any event, I kind of like the effect of the fountains. The popes built this out of Hadrian's ruins. That's why Hadrian's villa, 4 miles away in the town of Adria, is in ruins, because it's all here in the buildings that the popes made in the 15th and 16th century. But what else they did was they took a river, the Amieni River, they pushed it a mile towards the palace. They diverted it and pushed it towards their palace. And then, with hydraulic inventions, pushed water up through all kinds of fountains. And this estate is hundreds of acres. So there are many gardens, and it's very beautiful. The fountains play tricks. They don't all do what you think they're going to do, go straight up in the air. Sometimes when you pass them, they shoot out at you and dampen you. So the popes had a lot of fun there. They got their mistresses into the villas, and their boyfriends too, of course, and built something really beautiful. So maybe it was worthwhile. You can go see Spotlight to determine, to get a more rounded view of the whole papal thing. But in the Renaissance, they were having fun too, and building fountains. They didn't do that in the 21st century. So, okay, she arrives in Italy alone, and where are we here? She's in Aldo's car. And then finally she orders him onto the highway, and he drives her to a motel halfway between the Alban Hills, which are maybe 25 miles from Rome, and Rome itself. They're out in the countryside. When she wakes up in the morning, she will see cows right outside her window, and the view won't do. But she is saved by the desk clerk, whom I have, as they used to in the Renaissance, nicknamed Sharp-Eyed. And in Italian, that comes out to occhiuti, somebody whose occhio, occhi in the plural, are sharp. Occhiuti means sharp-eyed. And he saves her because when she gets in front of the motel, he says that will be something like 275 American dollars, and she picks up all her luggage, although he says, leave the luggage in the car. You can get change inside and come back for your luggage. She's a little smarter than he is. She brings all her luggage into the hotel, plops it in front of the desk, and Signor Occhiuti says, you must be Candida Darroway. Welcome. Are you having a little problem with your taxi driver? And she says, a little problem? I'm having an enormous problem. And so he goes out and he talks to Aldo, pointing to a building across the street, which is a prison. And he says, I will tell you how much she owes you. It's something like $43. But he says, the maximum fee you can charge this lady is $43 or 24,600 lira. Sorry, they weren't in the European Union then, so you always had to take your little calculator to figure out that a pair of shoes might be, 2 million lira or something. Nothing in English. She will pay you now. If you have the slightest objection, I will call for help. You'll be in that jail over there, and if I were you, Aldo, I'd make it my business never to show up in this neighborhood. You give all Albano Lazio and Rome a bad name. Well, she goes to bed. They give her a luncheon, a very nice luncheon. She wakes up in the morning, there are blonde cows. And so we're in the next chapter. And the next chapter is Rome at Last, chapter 5. She finds out the view wouldn't do. She loves the blonde cows, but she knows Rob Farrell will not. And she comes down at around 11:30 because she got in late. And the tourists are just traipsing in to the albergo, and they are tired and cranky. Barry Schwartz was reading the New York Times, muttering about the Watergate committees having learned that Nixon had actually recorded, incriminating conversations about the break-in. There was even talk of impeaching the president. And then Gerald Ford would be president, and Barry Schwartz wondered, how would that bumbler help the stock market? So like most of us who analyze politics, he's very self-centered. His business is with stocks and bonds, and he doesn't trust Ford. He trusted Nixon. He's very sad about that. I'm sorry. But he's a nice man in other ways. He did carpet his whole synagogue at his own expense. And the mere fact that he's shtupping the woman upstairs, who is his, shtupping is a Yiddish word, sorry about that, having intercourse with his nanny, it doesn't make no never mind. Candida then calls Charles Clark, who is in San Francisco in the fog belt, very nice neighborhood with fog. He lives in Russian Hill. And she calls him and he gurgles because he's just waking up. It's only 4 a.m. Charles gurgled, our budget doesn't stretch to the Savoy Plaza, Candida. The Albergo Buon Soggiorno. That's where they are in this motel. It means the Good Rest Hotel or Motel.
is a 2-star, yes, but near luxury facilities in lovely hill areas, just a few kilometers outside Rome. And she says, 16, Charles, and we didn't contract for 2 stars. This is no hotel, and certainly not a luxury place. It's flat as Nebraska out here. And he says, so what? Your bus can get you to Rome Central in half an hour, 45 minutes in heavy traffic. Your complaint is without merit. Before I could answer, he hung up. She dials back. He picks it up again. Yes? He asks slowly. I let him have it. It's not my company they'll sue, he tells her, because she says, we'll sue your insurance company. It's not my company they'll sue, it's your college. I doubt altruistic insurance will do much for your distressed tourists. Now, I've got to tell you, altruistic insurance is a little joke. Have you ever known an insurance company to be altruistic? Not really. But in any event, it's theirs. And it has as its owner and president, and he is on this tour, a real Jewish hero. Barry Schwartz may be just run-of-the-mill Jewish banker, but the owner of this insurance company is right up there with the great heroes of all time. And he is Candida's, one of her protectors. She attracts treacherous people, but she attracts protectors. Jonah Shainstein. And he says, our board of trustees is made up largely of very influential Silicon Valley venture capitalists. That was new in those days. Resolved to make these trips profitable for reasons we won't go into. I thought of the professional ice rink. They know Charles is cheating. Their media resources are, as you know, unlimited. Charles has limited resources. The point is, altruistic will go all out to defend the tourists. And so he says, call him back and tell him we'll sue. And she does. And she actually says, we'll turn your company, Travel Thrills, into Travel Chills. And Farrell says, I don't know how Farrell knew this, your Russian Hill condo is mortgaged to the hilt. If your company folds, your address will be Potrero Hill, a slum, not Russian Hill. Goodbye, Charles. And I hung up. And then Candida hung up. She says I hung up. Sometimes I get us mixed up. She walks back into the dining room, and the group is having a delicious luncheon. They prepared it and got it out in 20 minutes. And what are they having? The first course is of antipasto, meaning, first course, antipasto, before the meal, is composed of pesto, which some of you may know. How many of you have eaten pesto? Most of you. A sauce made of ground basil, pine nuts, garlic, olive oil. And it is something that's special to Candida. When she first discovered it, she was in Geneva doing research. I swooned. Mom, who came from Lucca, never made pesto, not native to Lucca. Italians tend to eat their native food. They are not adventurous when it comes to trying other provincial favorite dishes, but they're very knowledgeable about their own. Pesto now arrived on my corkscrewed noodles, fusilli, and the taste sent me through the ceiling. I'm not a big eater. I came to Italy that year purely for research, She's referring to the first time she'd eaten it on a research year. Because my father didn't want a pudgy daughter like his first wife, who was Jewish. He divorced her for a Gentile blonde named Sher, who probably weighs 90 pounds, soaking wet. Her mother, on the other hand, married a Lutheran who's very big indeed and has 3 small children. And so, people do what strikes them as the best thing. But Candida asserts that she's not about food. I'm about language and literature, not cooking and eating. And immediately she starts giving us a recipe. A really genuine pesto had to have pine nuts, but virgin olive oil did it no favors. Catherine knows because we once tried to make it with virgin olive oil. Too bland. The cheaper, stronger oils are best. A fine Parmesan cheese, Parmigiano from Parma, was a must, as was lots of garlic. I used to put 8 large mashed cloves into what I guessed was, she doesn't measure, roughly a 1.5 cups of basil chopped, and chopped parsley leaves and a bit more oil. And that's how I cook. I don't measure a thing unless I'm making a cake, then I have to measure. The herbs were in roughly the same proportion. I skipped Italian parsley, it's too mild. I went for the familiar American kind. Basil, basilico, has to be bright green. But if one must shop at Safeway, where things aren't very fresh, to tell you the truth, it could work out. Into the blender with all but the blackest and slimiest ones. As they said in Florence, patience, pazienza. I lived in Florence for 5 months, and I went shopping with my little net bag in Florence. So I developed not only pazienza, but a few smarts about how to shop. One didn't need a teacher for everything. Now, I have to confess, Candida and I share this feeling about cooking. I'm not fond of it, and I have this feeling about cooking. Some people are born good cooks, and if not, with time comes mastery. Didn't great Renaissance artists have to work hard as apprentices to their masters? Be your own master. So somewhere else I mentioned, if you've had something you like in a restaurant, if you're not a total fool, you can go home and reproduce it without a recipe. I have a thing about recipes. I don't look at them. Unlike Teresa, Tony's grandmother, descendant of the royal family who once owned Genoa, Teresa, her family, the Della Savoyas, owned the place where Genoa was, and Genoa invented pesto. And in Genoa, the ancestral home of this sauce, they make it with pine nuts. I stopped using them. They make the sauce too slippery. I prefer a grainy finish to my pesto, but the pesto of your heart may well require pine nuts. So, she's
$22.95 a pound.
Yeah, they're very expensive, and I think really Candida and I are kind of cheap. So I leave out the pine nuts, and I say, you get a nice grainy finish. That's the way I like it. It's the heart, not the stomach, most affected by cheese and oil or salt and sugar. The salt is in the cheese. Well, she manages to put them, she finds out from the desk clerk that 200 and so on Japanese businessmen are down with a flu, and their wives are with them, and they're all in hospital in Iceland. And she overhears this, and she calls the director of the Parco dei Principi on the Via Veneto, and she's so tactful. She talks with the director as if she too managed a hotel. I could do this for you. It starts in Italian. Pronto, hello. I heard as I finished punching in the number. Albergo Parco dei Principi. That's the answer that's coming back. What do you wish? Che desidera per cortesia? And I tell them that we are stranded without a good hotel, and I wind up getting excellent accommodations for $75 a person per night, and in those days it was well over $250, with breakfast included. And the director is obviously in my corner. He can't wait to see me. He tells me, you're so wonderful to make these arrangements. I need you. I say, I need you. I walk back into the dining room, and I tell Farrell I've just managed to get us into a 5-star on the Via Veneto, where all the fashionable shops are. And he stands up and rings his glass with the tines of his fork and says, "Ladies and gentlemen of the Altamonte Tour Group, I've just secured a 5-star luxury hotel on the edge of Rome's finest shopping street, under her most beautiful park, the Borghese Gardens." And so Candida knows that from now on he will be their hero and she will be their handmaiden. Well, it is already 25 after 4, and I had tried in my notes to get you to Florence, but I kind of felt that I wouldn't because I'm not a fast reader. Are there any questions you'd like to ask? I don't want to keep you here until you all fall asleep.
The name you mentioned after Via Veneto, what did that mean?
Well, it's the street of Venice. The Veneto is the name of an area that
No,
Venice
I know
used to
about-
own.
I know about the street, but there was you threw some Italian in there about maybe something on Via Veneto. What was that?
Well, I threw in the name of the hotel, the Parco dei Principi Hotel. Was that it? It's the Park of Princes, because the hotel stands right next to the Borghese Garden Park. And Via simply means the street of Venice, Venice Street.
Yeah, I stayed there.
You stay there, lucky you.
Well, it was $17 a night to stay at the Regina Carlton, and that was in '69, I think.
I stayed at the Regina Palace on Lago Maggiore for 12, and I had waiters falling all over themselves to help me, and well, in any event, they were falling all over themselves. I was much younger, and it was much cheaper, and the hotel was half empty, so they were glad to have me at $12 a night. But believe me, you don't get treated that way anymore when you go on a trip to Italy. I mean, times have changed. Well, that's the nature of this book. I have books if you'd like to buy them. It will save you postage if you buy them here. And if you think that this would be a book you'd like to explore, I will tell you that Candida does fall in love with W.L. The love scenes in this book are graphic, but they're not filthy. I think I'm known for that.
Barbara,
What?
it's really something, I was talking with Sophie, Sophie is an organist in our church, and she and Barbara both have a passion for Bach and the fugues of Bach. And I mentioned to her about your graphic description of, I didn't read it to her, I just told her about it, of Candida's description of her lovemaking with Spotswood, with the professor.
Spotswood.
As the parts of a Bach fugue. Well, Sophie got so, oh, she says, leave it to Barbara. Barbara would know that, So she says that alone would be an incentive for someone to really see the thought, the feeling, the descriptions I mean, not because Barbara's my friend, but I can tell you that being an English major myself, if that means anything by the way of credentials, I think Barbara outdid herself with this novel. Not only is it a story of real people, of their encounters with each other, but of their growth from the experiences that they've had with each other. That I think it's just really very, very good. And this comes, I think, with living. And Barbara, certainly we've been blessed by the people that have influenced us in our lives. And it's obvious with the book that you've written that you have had some wonderful, wonderful teachers.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Lynn to make a statement because she has to leave. And Lynn is...
It's hard to leave, hard to tear myself away, even though I'm teaching right after this. I'm hypnotized by all of the apocryphal and expansive support to the novel, which I know from an editing standpoint, but to hear your grasp of history and to hear the asides and the anecdotes and everything, I'm sort of hypnotized. I'm supposed to teach right after it. I find it very hard to leave. I liked when you talked about I've forgotten which character says that prostitution is really obedience to the male will. It's really not about sexuality. I thought that was interesting. And about the golem and about, there are a lot of references that are both Jewish and they cross over into so many religions and cultures in such a subtle and rich sort of a way. I really particularly enjoyed that today. So it was nice to hear you expound upon and to draw the richness of your experience. It sort of brings the book to light in a whole different way than my experience only as editing it. But one thing I thought she left out that is important is that there are very rich and lengthy descriptions of art and history, but they're punctuated by your witty asides, and the witty asides sort of humanize and bring into our contemporary time all of these complex, rich, and academic allusions. It makes it accessible to us. So I'm enjoying this because it's such a, and it sort of sets Candida in a rich sea of many other allusions and references. So it's really, really interesting to hear you talk about it.
Thank you. I know you lectured on 12 novels and did it so brilliantly, and I was a little overwhelmed when I thought how brilliantly you did it and how difficult it was for me to make progress. I would like to just identify my paintings because there's really not much time left. This is Emilia Romana, but it could be Tuscany. You can't really tell the difference. This is a farmhouse, and it's very typical. And yes, my trees are off at an angle, but I think it gives it a kind of charm.
It's whimsical. And
It's whimsical.
It stands out.
I've only been painting with watercolors for a year and a half. This little one down here is the balcony of Romeo and Juliet, because the group does get to Verona. You may think they don't ever get away from the Alban Hills, but they do. Of course, let's see, can I keep my head straight? We leave Rome and we travel to Viterbo, which was a summer home of popes. And Viterbo is full of little squares, beautifully landscaped. I don't know how else to explain it. There's nothing grand about the downtown, but it's one after another of these little squares. There are cathedrals on hills, but we only stop for coffee. This is typical of any place in Italy. Olive trees and wildflowers. And you could say the same thing for this one lone cypress tree. Now, I cheated here. I am not Raphael. But when the group got to Urbino in the Marches, or Marche, we visited the palace where the courtier was written by Castiglione. And it was a palace filled with art. Duke Frederick loved art, and he loved literature. And he surrounded himself with people like Raphael and Castiglione and Cardinal Bembo, who wrote terrific poetry in Latin, which I don't understand. And he was a cardinal, and I think he had mistresses, but what the hell. This was one of the paintings in the original palace. It's called La Muta, the Quiet Lady. And Rob Farrell, who knows more about art history than I do, or Candida, suggested it may be a self-portrait of Raphael because he was a trickster. And though we're not sure, some people say this is Raphael's face. Others say no. The lady, and I know you can't see it, holds a letter which may be a proposal, but she in fact did live, some lady, called the Mute Woman, and she couldn't talk. And one of my characters that I haven't introduced at all is a minor character, but she's very quiet and she doesn't talk much. And so when she sees this picture hanging in the castle of Urbino, which is over, I guess, to the eastern seaboard side of Italy, she said, maybe the man who proposed just preferred quiet women, because she herself doesn't say much. But I kind of like that line. This you may recognize as the towers of San Gimignano. There's a lot of drama in San Gimignano in the novel. Only a fool would try to do a watercolor painting of the Cathedral of Milano, and I am the fool. And this is Siena. I'll hold it up because it's kind of far down. There's a tower that is amazing, the Tower of Siena, and I tried to indicate that there's a very large campo, or square, around it, which is where they have horse races, the Palio, every summer. But Siena is such a full chapter. It is a chapter where Farrell tries to seduce Candida, and where later he shows up in her bathroom while she is washing her hair underwater, sunk underwater. So she gets away from him, but when she comes up out of the water, I do that with my own hair sometimes, but now we're not supposed to fill the tub, so I don't do it. But anyway, I don't ever find a man sitting on the corner of my bathtub contemplating what to do next. And so it's kind of a nasty scene, but a funny scene. Anyway, I like that painting because it was so hard to do. And you're all spared. You don't know it, but you are. I was going to use this as the cover of my Candida book, but Bill said it looked like a child's book cover, so they did what they could with the regular cover. Obviously, these are my interpretations, rather comic, of Venice, and I think that takes care of all my attempts to illustrate a reading that I didn't get far enough through, but I suspected I wouldn't. So if you really want to know what happens in the book, you're going to have to read it yourself.
I think you will need that.
Yes.